Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a fascinating yet lesser-known chapter of history, the story of Paulicianism. So let's get started. Paulicianism was a medieval Christian sect that started in Armenia in the 7th century. The followers of this sect, known as Paulicians, called themselves good Christians. The name Paulician actually comes from outsiders and means followers of Paul, though which Paul they were following is a bit of a mystery. Some say it was Paul the Apostle, while others think it might have been a different Paul entirely. The founder of the Paulicians was an Armenian named Constantine. He came from a community near Samosata, which is in modern-day Turkey. Constantine was deeply inspired by the Gospels and the Epistles, and he wanted to bring back what he saw as the pure Christianity of Paul the Apostle. So, around 660 AD, he started his first congregation in a place called Kibasa, Armenia. Sadly, 27 years later, he was arrested for heresy and stoned to death. But that wasn't the end for the Paulicians. A court official named Simeon, who was responsible for Constantine's execution, ended up converting to the Paulician faith. He took on the name Titus and became the new leader, but he too met a tragic end, being burned to death in 690 AD. After Simeon's death, the Paulicians fled with their new leader, Paul, to a place called Episparis. Paul passed away in 715 AD, leaving his sons, Genesius and Theodore, to carry on the faith. There was a bit of drama between the brothers, but eventually Genesius became the leader. He even managed to convince the Byzantine emperor that he wasn't a heretic. In 747 AD, Emperor Constantine V moved many Paulicians to Thrace to help strengthen the border with Bulgaria. Despite ongoing persecution, the sect continued to grow and even attracted some of the iconoclasts. By the late 8th century, the Paulicians experienced a split into two groups: the Bunnites, who stuck to the old ways, and the Sergites, who followed a reformer named Sergius. Sergius was a passionate and effective leader who spread his version of the faith far and wide. Unfortunately, his activities led to more persecution by the Byzantine authorities. And in 843, the Empress Theodora, acting as regent for her son Michael III, launched a major persecution against the Paulicians throughout Asia Minor. It's said that in Byzantine Armenia alone, around 100,000 Paulicians lost their lives or property. In the face of this brutal persecution, many Paulicians, led by their new leader Karbeas, fled to areas of Armenia under Arab control. Under the protection of Umar al-Aqta, the emir of Melitene, they were allowed to build two fortress cities, Amara and Thrace, and even establish an independent state. Karbeas died in 863 during Michael III's campaign against the Arabs. He might have been with Umar at Melakapi before the Battle of Lalakan. His successor, Chrysocheres, also known as the Golden Hand, led devastating raids against Byzantine cities. In 867, he advanced as far as Ephesus, capturing many priests. In 868, Emperor Basil I sent Petrus Siculus to negotiate their release. During his 9-month stay with the Paulicians, Petrus collected many details about them, which he later documented. However, peace talks failed, and the war resumed. Chrysocheres was eventually killed in the Battle of Bathes Ryax around 872 or 878. By 878, Emperor Basil I had conquered the Paulician strongholds in Asia Minor, including Thrace, and many surviving Paulicians were displaced. Some migrated further into Armenia, where they gradually merged into the Tundrakian sect during the 10th century. Others were relocated by the Byzantine authorities to the empire's western frontier. Around 20,000 Paulicians even served in Byzantine Italy under General Nikephoros Phokas the Elder. In 970, Emperor John Zimisces moved 200,000 Paulicians to Philippopolis in Thrace. As a reward for their promise to defend against the Bulgarians, the emperor allowed them to practice their faith freely. This marked a revival for the sect in the West. However, this policy had mixed results for the Byzantines. The Paulicians brought limited economic and military benefits and didn't assimilate well with the local Roman and Bulgarian populations. Instead, they managed to convert many inhabitants of Thrace to their beliefs. By the end of the 11th century, Philippopolis and its surroundings were largely populated by Paulicians, bolstered by new Armenian migrants. In 1081, several thousand Paulicians served in the army of Emperor Alexios I Komnenos against the Norman Robert Guiscard, but they later deserted and were imprisoned. According to Anna Komnene, Alexios I succeeded in converting many Paulicians around Philippopolis to Orthodox Christianity, even building a new city, Alexiopolis, for these converts. During the First Crusade, some Paulicians, referred to as Publicani, were found in the Muslim armies, although others aided the Crusaders. When Frederick Barbarossa passed near Philippopolis during the Third Crusade, the Paulicians welcomed him as a liberator, in contrast to the Greek inhabitants. In 1205, they cooperated with Kalian to surrender Philippopolis to the Second Bulgarian Empire, and according to the historian Yordan Ivanov, some of the remaining Paulicians in Thrace converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity during the Second Bulgarian Empire. After the fall of this empire and the Ottoman conquest of Thrace, many of these Paulicians, along with some Bulgarians, converted to Islam and became known as the Pamake people. Those Paulicians who held on to their original faith eventually converted to Roman Catholicism during the 16th or 17th century. By the end of the 17th century, these Roman Catholic descendants of the Paulicians were living around Nikopol, Bulgaria. They faced religious persecution by the Ottomans. Following the Cheprevci uprising in 1688, many fled across the Danube, settled in the Banat region, and became known as Banat Bulgarians. After Bulgaria's liberation from Ottoman rule in 1878, some of these Banat Bulgarians resettled in northern Bulgaria. In Armenia, after the Russo-Turkish War of 1828 to 1829, communities influenced by Paulician or Tundrakian practices could still be found in Russian-controlled Armenia. Documents from about 1837 detail their professions of faith and debates with the Gregorian bishop, later published by Frederick Cornwallis Conoiber. Now, let's talk about their beliefs. The Paulicians considered themselves Christians, but their beliefs have been hotly debated. Their critics often labeled them as Jews, Muslims, or Manichaeans, likely as insults rather than accurate descriptions. There are many controversies about their beliefs, including the nature of God, Christ, and their rituals. Most of what we know about Paulician beliefs comes from their opponents, with a few exceptions like Petrus Siculus's History of the Paulician Heresy, which includes letters attributed to Sergius Tychicus and possibly a reworking of a Paulician historical account. Another key source is The Key of Truth, thought to be a manual of the medieval Paulician or Tundrakian Church in Armenia. This text was first identified in 1837 by Armenian ecclesiastical authorities tracing dissidents led by Hovhannes Vardabedian. British Orientalist Frederick Conoiber published a translation in 1898. However, some scholars, like Anna Ohanjanian, have questioned its authenticity, suggesting it might have been influenced by Protestant missionaries in Armenia. Regarding their theological stance, some scholars argue that the Paulicians were dualistic, believing in two opposing deities, an evil demiurge, the ruler of the visible world, and a good spirit, the god of the future world. This dualistic belief system has led to their traditional labeling as Manichaeans and Marcionists by critics and scholars. However, 18th century scholar Johann Lorenz von Mosheim disputed the identification of Paulicians as Manichaeans, arguing that while both were dualistic, the Paulicians differed on several key points and rejected the teachings of the prophet Mani. Other scholars, like Johann Karl Ludwig Gieseler and August Neander, saw the Paulicians as deriving from Marcionism, a dualistic sect that tried to align more closely with early Christianity. By the mid-19th century, the dominant scholarly view was that the Paulicians represented a non-Manichaean, dualistic Gnostic doctrine with significant elements of early Christianity closest to Marcionism. However, Frederick Conover claimed, "The Paulicians are not dualists in any other sense than the New Testament is itself dualistic. Satan is simply the adversary of man and God." Interestingly, reports from Catholic missionaries working among the remaining Paulicians in the Balkans during the 16th-18th centuries do not mention dualist beliefs at all. And when it comes to their beliefs about Jesus, the Paulicians were quite unorthodox. They might have believed in non-Trinitarianism, which means they didn't see Jesus as being co-eternal and co-equal with God the Father and the Holy Spirit. This is similar to the beliefs of Arian Christians and some early Christian sects like the Adoptionists. Because of these beliefs, critics often labeled them as Arians, while some scholars identified them as Adoptionists. Frederick Conover, in his work The Key of Truth, noted that the Paulicians almost certainly rejected the concept of the Trinity as unscriptural. He believed they thought Christ came down from heaven to free humans from the physical body and the material world. Conover argued that the Paulicians were actually remnants of early adoptionist Christianity in Armenia, rather than being dualist or Gnostic. Although his theory faced skepticism, it gained support from Nina Garcian in the 1960s, who argued that Paulicianism had independently developed elements of docetism and dualism. More recently, at the 2022 Unitarian Christian Alliance Conference, Sean Finnegan presented evidence suggesting that the Armenian sect behind the Key of Truth, while non-Trinitarian, did not adhere to adoptionist Christology. He pointed out that the text affirms the virgin birth and uses the term "only born for Christ," indicating a distinct belief system. When it comes to rituals and practices, the Paulicians were said to use a different set of sacred texts compared to Orthodox Christianity. Byzantine scholars claimed that they accepted the four Gospels, particularly that of Luke, 14 of Paul's epistles, the 3 epistles of John, and the epistles of James and Jude. They also claimed to have an epistle to the Laodiceans. However, they reportedly rejected the first epistle of Peter and the entire Old Testament. Like the Nestorians, the Paulicians rejected calling Mary the Theotokos, or Mother of God, and refused to venerate her. Their places of worship were known as places of prayer, typically small rooms in modest houses. Despite their ascetic tendencies, they did not restrict foods and allowed marriage. They were also iconoclasts, rejecting the Christian cross, sacraments, and the hierarchical structure of the established church. This led historian Edward Gibbon to consider them as worthy precursors of the Reformation, with some viewing them as proto-Protestants. In the Key of Truth, which is thought to reflect Paulician or Tondrakian beliefs, the Old Testament, baptism, penance, and the Eucharist are all accepted. Reports from early modern Catholic missionaries about the Paulicians in the Balkans claimed they were iconoclasts, using fire instead of water in baptism and having a simplified view of priesthood. This practice of baptism by fire was corroborated by the contemporary English diplomat Paul Riceout.